What's going on, everyone? It's Raptor Scope here, and today I'm going to give you a look into my controls. Now, I know controls can be a little daunting, and this also does apply a little bit from DCS as well because I fly controller on both War Thunder and DCS. But we're going to first go ahead and get into the controls, and we're going to start off with our aircraft. Now, for mine, for sim controls, I can leave my control mode off. That way that there is no mouse aim or joystick that you're going to be seeing on the screen if you're flying solely with controller. Virtual instructor and auto trimmer off, control mode and SAS mode are off as well. I personally don't use toggle SAS mode, but if needed, you can add that in. Now it seems like a little daunting, an odd combination, but with everything, you'll kind of see how it all plays out. So I continue on with the throttle being square and triangle, and just looking at it here, you'll see that I keep them complete values. There's no axis in between those at all. So there's no possibility of bringing the axis. And make sure you keep them in relative control and keep value for disabled axis. What that's going to do is that's going to allow your throttle to stay at a certain position. Now, relative control sensitivity, you can toggle back and forth to what your own preference is. Mine personally is 60 because I like it to be a little bit more controllable and less in higher steps, but personal preference. We're going to go and continue on into the roll axis. Now, roll axis stays at 1 for the multiplier and 1.3 for the nonlinearity. That way it gives me, as you can see, just that little bit of lightness in it. Right there you see. That's what you want. That way that you're having a little bit smoother transitions in between your left and right in your roll. Now, if you want it to be a little snappier, you can adjust this back down to 1, which you'll see it gives you that 1-to-1 ratio again. But personal preference, of course, dictates that. I like mine at 1.3. Other people may like it higher or lower. It just depends on the person. That's it for roll. And the same thing follows with the pitch as well. Your pitch is going to be, roughly, you can keep it like it has mine, 1.3. Now, me personally, I had to invert my axis. When I press the stick forward on the controller, without the inversion, my nose goes up instead of down, which to me just is a little, it messes with my mind. So just to keep everything in sim condition, make sure to keep your axis inverted just so that you don't have that issue of where you press forward on the stick and then you end up raising your nose instead of lowering it like it should be or as it would be in real life. Um, my yaw axis is L2 and R2. And I keep those on the joystick axis mostly because that way I get that fine tune. That's what you want with it. You want to be able to actually give it a little bit of it if you need to be able to keep it touchy, but also if you need to jam it in, you can. Personally, I keep mine at 0.85 just because I like it to be a little bit slower. I don't want it to give as much rudder because I like it to keep the rudder a little bit tighter. But again, personal preference. You can keep it at 1-to-1 and you're still going to be able to do the same things. You're just going to have a little bit extra touch to your sensitivity. Um, we'll continue on. This other ones is that the sensitivities. Your sensitivities can either be higher or lower depending on if you have, for me, for example, I have a very light touch to the stick. So I keep it higher because that way I can have a lot better control over my aircraft. And if need be, I can have those rapid rolls and pitch down and up rapidly. It just keeps everything a little bit smoother personally. Let's continue on. And we're going to go scroll down a little bit more into the mechanizations. Now in mechanizations, I don't have booster set. And again, this is a testing. This is a control setup. I have a testing. As I build upon it, I'll be putting more updates out in the near future as much as I can, just so I can keep everybody up on up. And don't think of this as just a PlayStation only. You can utilize this also for Xbox. You should have not as limited. Personally, I feel like the Xbox controller may be a little bit more suited for this, but again, everybody has their own feel for it. So for this R1 and is going to be one of your modifiers, as well as L1, R1, and also L1. What those are going to do is that's going to free up a lot of binds that you're going to be able to use. So instead of just being able to bind roughly, let's use spitball and say 24 binds, you're actually going to be able to do upwards of almost, my goodness, 8, 16, 24, about 32 to 38 bindings just on your controller alone. Now, that sets a lot of things to be able to do on a controller in a game that some people may consider requires a secondary device to be able to input all the things in, but it's not needed. Toggle gear is R1L3. We continue forward into weaponry. I keep it very simple. X is primary, circle is secondary. I keep R1X as rocket salvo, and that's just also a personal preference touch. A lot of these others I don't have bound because I don't necessarily need them at the moment. This right here is actually supposed to be bound. All these are bound on the same binds, but that's also just to keep everything simple. L1, L3 is going to be your secondary weapon switch. You have your countermeasures on your right stick, so you never have to take your hands off of your sticks to be able to pop your countermeasures. You have your radar modes as well. That's going to assist you in being able to have everything centralized on one set. So you have your L1 set for your radar functions as well as your radar cues. And I'll go ahead and go in this as well to see. For this, you'll have enable access as L1. What that's going to do is when you press L1 you try to look around, it's going to act like it is not going to be able to look around, but it's going to function your radar cue, which is going to be your little square. And I'll show you that once we're finished. It's going to make it to where that you're going to be able to actually move your cue and lock targets instead of having to click your select target, which makes things a little bit easier, as well as being able to slot that cue whenever you're in TWS on things that are out in distance, or you have a grouping and you want to select one specific one. You can do that now. So that's going to be L1, and right stick is more comfortable for me. Now, if you're using a flight stick or HOTAS, you can, and you do have certain binds where you can move them. You can cue them into this. You can put those into this and have an actual setup for a HOTAS, which is amazing. But this is primarily for controller players. Now, in the future, once I do get a HOTAS, I probably will touch more into this with that. But as far as right now, controller is where we're going to work with. So let's continue forward. And it's the same thing as well for the horizontal as the vertical. L1 is going to be your enable axis, and your right stick is going to be up down, and that's going to change your vertical cue. Again, you're going to be able to move that cue inside your radar. Your radar IRST tilt is going to be very crucial, especially if you're flying something along that only has a search radar. You're then going to be able to tilt your radar elevation up and be able to lock things at a lower altitude, which is very, very helpful whenever you're in situations, for example, like flying a Japanese F4EJ, where they don't have a pulse Doppler radar, but you can make that usable for your advantage. A lot of things, again, I don't really have for aircraft because I primarily run fighters. So I don't have gunners, I don't really run bombers, but in the future I will have things set up for that. Toggle view is going to be L1 options, and that's just a personal one for me. I can press options and it's going to bring up the menu. If I press L1 in options, it's going to change my view so that if I do have a lightning pod on a Tomcat, or either a targeting pod on a Harrier, I can utilize those. We'll continue forward, and we're going to just skip a lot of stuff into the view axis. So this is the one that changes things around. Instead of making it to where that you have a one singular button to where you zoom in, zoom out, and either have a minimum function or a maximum function. This takes that out. What this does, With L1 as your enable axis and you set L2, R2, it will not counteract with your rudders, and you can actually slowly zoom in or slowly zoom out without having to worry about moving around your head or any of that, or moving around your airplane. It's stable and you're going to be able to have that access. I personally keep mine at 1.25, but that's just to make everything simpler for me. Just, it makes it a little bit faster. Um, for view in battle, I have the right stick. Right stick is going to be everything for view. And my modifier, and I'll show you, and make sure in view and battle you have, if you want to be able to look at a target and not have to move your stick, or if you let go and it stays there, you turn relative control on and keep value for disabled axis. And then make sure you have a handy reset button. That way that's going to recenter your view. The same thing is going to apply with the view and battle air y-axis. It's going to be the same thing. R1 and up is going to be your reset value, and that just keeps everything together. That's going to make it to where that when you press that, your horizontal and your vertical axis of view is going to be recentered to the center point of your airplane or your helicopter. uh, this one is kind of a niche one. I have it, but I have bind issues with it. Now I have it set to R1. I hold R1 to enable it. And now I can move my head forward and backward, which what that's going to do is that's going to make the crosshair a little bit smaller on your front glass, but it's going to bring your head closer in. Now, what that's going to do is that's going to make targets in that a little bit bigger, and it's going to make your crosshair a little bit smaller to where that it makes it easier for you to actually get your shots on. This is also very situational because some planes are not the greatest for utilizing this, and some planes it's great because you can actually move your head around, and that's going to make everything a lot easier in the future. I keep my head movement back and forth at about 80% just so it's not too high. That way I'm not slamming my head forward or slamming it back. It's just that smooth, nice, even motion. For the upward and downward as well, up, down, left, right. And this, you're going to actually have enable axis as L1 and R2. And again, that goes in the same pattern of having L1 and R2 either separately pressed or pressed together to be modifier buttons. And that's going to free up a lot of controllability throughout your airplane. The same thing applies as a future. R1 and up recenters everything. And in that, once you have your upward and downward movement set, as well as keeping these in relative and keep value for disabled axis, when you keep it in the relative control and the keep value, when you raise your head up, you're actually going to be able to raise that crosshair up. Like, for example, in a P-51, when you're pulling lead and you raise your head up, you're going to see that crosshair actually drop a little bit below if you don't raise your head. If you raise your head up, you can actually still continue to see that crosshair in your canopy as you're pulling lead and then get shots on. And that's how that's going to work for you. And it's going to be the same thing for your left and right movement. Right stick, left and right, L1 and R1 together for enable axis, and then R1 up for reset value. So right now, we have open cockpit to R1, R3, and a lot of binds are really not set in. Now this is a very crucial one to have. Your elevator trim and all your trim functions is going to be set on your directional pad. And what that's going to do is that's going to give you ease of access to be able to trim your aircraft out while you're in flight, and the same thing applies in helicopters. You'll be trimming them out so that you are completely stable. You're going to also, and let me go into that, your elevators is going to be 20% relative control, and make sure for all these values, keep relative control and keep value for disabled axis on. That way that whenever you're using your trim, it's not going to reset back to 0. You want to be able to keep those functions of trim and be able to adjust them as you fly. And that's going to be able, that's going to help you tremendously. So this is also going to be in, this is going to be in 20% relative control. The ailerons, and I'll show you this. I'll go back to the elevator after I've shown them all, just to make sure everybody gets it. Your aileron trim is going to be right and left. You do not need a reset value for the reset value axis, because you're not wanting to get a reset. You're wanting to keep those trims and then adjust it as you go. This keeps it to where you can adjust on the fly without having to worry about any miscalculations. And of course, this stays 20% relative control sensitivity as well. Now we're going to go ahead and continue into the rudder. Now rudder is going to be a little bit different. Enable axis is going to be R1. So now what this does is that you have your finger on R1, you're just in flight. You hold R1 and now you're pressing left and right. Now your rudder is going left and right. So now you have full control up, down, left, right, and also your rudder as R1 left, right. That gives you a complete control over your aircraft. And maintaining the same thing, relative control stays in 20% for your trim, and you keep value for disabled axis and relative control on. Continuing on, the engine controls, which is going to be a little bit more of a challenge for Xbox controllers right now. For PlayStation, I have R1, L1, and then I press the touchpad. That toggles your engine controls to be able to adjust your mixture, your prop pitch as such. R1, L1 up is going to turn my engine on. And the process of this is that and I will also say this is a binds in progress. Again, this is testing, and this gives y'all something to be able to work with. Who knows, someone may be able to make this control setup better than I have. And if you are, please feel free to contact me. But we'll continue onward. So you press R1, L1, and the touchpad together, you get your engine controls mode on. Now your mixture is going to be up to here, R1, L1, triangle. Now you hold those down, and then your right stick slides up and down. So what that's going to do is that's going to and it depends on how hard you press your stick up to be able to toggle that. You hold them down, and now you're adjusting your mixture, your propeller pitch, and that's going to be the same thing. And make sure to keep value for disabled axis on and relative control on. This one for propeller pitch is going to be R1, L1 and holding square, and then the right stick up and down. We continue on to the next. Your prop pitch is going to be R1, L1 left on the D-pad and auto radiator R1, L1 right on the D-pad. And then the same value applies radiator and oil radiator R1, L1 X for your radiator. And that one gives you a little bit ease of access to be able to adjust your elevator on while you're, no pun intended, on the fly. You keep your relative control and keep value for disabled axis on as well for this one, and nothing really else changes from that. The same thing applies in your oil radiator. Enable axis R1, L1 circle with your keep value and relative control on, and everything else the same. And we continue for a little bit further on. Now, supercharger is R1, L1 down, but honestly, we're going to rebind that, and we're going to make next magneto position down. And we're going to do actually, we'll leave that one for the moment, because not a lot of times you won't be flying over 12 to 13,000, for example, in a prop. And if you are, then kudos to you. You're flying higher than the majority of the American tech trees. But next magneto position is going to be R1, L1 down. And what all this is going to do, now I don't have a prop feathering button as well yet, or extinguishers or any of those such, because 9 times out of 10, if you're getting shot in a prop, you should be able to maintain this, your propeller pitch, your radiator, as well as working your trim if available, to be able to glide yourself back to base without many issues. You don't really need engine controls on setup unless you're flying something of a bomber sorts. And with that, later on, I will have certain setups for those as well. But for right now, this is the setup for the fighter role. If you have any other questions, definitely leave a comment, and I definitely try to get back to you as soon as I can. I will also add in my Discord into the description so that anybody can get in touch with me. But overall, that's all the controls for the aircraft. Hope you'll have a wonderful day and keep on going with it.